Hello, my name is Chuck Wolfe. Over the years, I've worked in many different roles, including leading my own leadership consulting company since 1994. I've worked for and with some of the best companies and universities in the world, and have had the opportunity to work with government officials, military organizations, and public and private schools. I'm a leading expert and pioneer in emotional intelligence. Since 2009, I have been a volunteer hosting a radio show I created called The Emotion Roadmap: Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. I really enjoy making a difference in people's lives. The show is on award-winning community radio station WPKN in Bridgeport, Connecticut. In recent years, Simsbury Community Television has been sharing my shows on their station and on YouTube. My sincere hope is that everyone who watches regularly will learn how to use the emotion roadmap in their own lives by listening to people who call in to get help with challenges at work, home, and in communities. To learn more, go to www.emotionroadmap.com. If you have a comment or question, email me at cjwolfe@cjwolfe.com. Thank you and enjoy the show. Hi, and this is Chuck Wolfe, and you're listening to the Emotion Roadmap: Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. This is WPKN 89.5 FM, listener-supported radio, and we're broadcasting from downtown Bridgeport, Connecticut. And it's February, and it's one of those days in the wintertime where it's kind of wondering whether the weather's wondering what to do. We've had some cold weather, and we have some warm weather coming up. It's going to be 60 degrees in Connecticut. Some of this change in climate, I got to say, on days like that, it doesn't feel that terrible, despite some of the other terrible consequences. Anyway, I just hope that all of you are, your State of the Union is something that you feel at least okay about and possibly even good about. And this show is here to help you deal with whatever emotional challenges you might be facing as you go forward into the day and into the new year we're experiencing in 2023. I hope the year has been off to a good start for you. And for those of you that are regular listeners, I want to thank you very much for tuning in. I always appreciate those people that are tuning in from week to week and have a chance to talk with me. I'm only on twice a month, but I am on consecutive weeks, the first and second Wednesday of each month from 12 noon to 1 p.m. Next month, it happens to be a month dedicated to women, and I'll be featuring one pre-recorded show with several outstanding women I've gotten to know and meet over the years. I'd like to have a chance to replay some excerpts from some of the conversations I've had with them since I've been doing this show. And as those of you who have listened to me in the last several times I've been on the air, you know I'm excited about being in my 14th year now at WPKN. As I think back and I reflect over the course of my life, I didn't know I'd be doing a radio show in Connecticut at all. And when I was first asked and approached to do the show, I thought, it sounds fun, and maybe I'll do it for a year or two or a few years. And now it's 14 years later, and I'm very excited to be on the air. And I'm so glad that so many of you who do call in and have a chance to listen regularly, somewhat regularly anyway, and have over the years found it a benefit to you, and hopefully a benefit to you and those that you care about, those that you work with, those that you live with, those that you like, those that you love, and those that you have to get along with. Hopefully it's been beneficial to them too because of what you've learned. What I try to do on the show, for those of you that might be new, is to educate people about what we're learning about the science of emotional intelligence and some ways I found to make it useful. I had the great privilege of working with the pioneers in the field a number of years ago, started in the late 1990s, so I've been doing this now over 20 years, and it's actually, going on 25 years. I've been in the field of emotional intelligence, so I'm considered one of the pioneers. And one of the things that I was asked to do in joining the people that actually discovered this new science of emotional intelligence was to find ways to make it useful. Because it's one thing to learn about science and to learn about new innovative ideas that are being proven in the field through laboratory research that are making our world a better place. But how exactly do some ideas that are new, that are innovative, make the world a better place for you? Well, one of those ideas was this concept that we have discovered that there's a different kind of intelligence than what we'd always thought of as intelligence. We always thought emotions kind of fell into the overall general intelligence. Some view it as cognitive intelligence. But the idea of having some kind of analytic intelligence, which is helpful for us for all kinds of things, critical thinking, problem solving, and yet when we think about it, we can't really think independently about problem solving without understanding the role emotions play. So even without the discovery of a new intelligence, we could always recognize that emotions play a role in our world. I listened to the president last night, and I listened to Sarah Huckabee Sanders give the GOP response to the president. And, it's very different the way we view certain situations, of course. And I have to say that there were things that were represented from both speakers that I thought really resonated. And I thought were absolutely on target. And then some things which I thought might be off target a bit, at least for me. Because all of us interpret the things that we see, the things that we hear, the things that we feel through our own experiences, through our own biases. I know people don't like to think of themselves as biases, but I've been doing some really interesting work in that field in recent years. And I really believe without being, without judgment, that all of us carry biases. I think it's part of what helps us when we're growing up to kind of identify with who are we a part of. What's our group that we belong to? What's our tribe? A lot of people talk about the role of tribalism in today's world. So one of the things I really think is really important is to understand that, hey, we all kind of, when we're experiencing life growing up, sort of see the people around us in our neighborhood as part of our group. We see the people where we go to school as part of our group. We cheer for our school teams. We cheer for our athletes that compete in our area from our town. Doesn't mean we don't like the other schools, we don't like the other towns or states or countries. It's just that, we sort of grow up with, hey, who are we a part of? And then as we start to understand how we are part of a certain group, we look to the things we like about that group. And if we want to not like the other team because we're cheering for our team, we look for the things we don't like about the other team. I mean, that's a very basic way of saying how life sort of starts. And then some of the really unfortunate biases creep in with the stereotypes. Hey, you know about those kind of people. You don't want them moving next door. All the stuff that you start to hear that are biases passed on from one generation to the next. And partly it's because people grew up in sort of, I don't know, you might call them ghetto areas where you sort of kind of hung with your own. You might see a group of people who came in from Italy or Ireland living together, or Jews might cluster together, or Muslims might cluster together. People from Somalia might cluster together. We sort of have these groups that we sort of again identify with, and then how do we identify them? We kind of think, well, this is what we like about our group. At the time we are in now, I think what we're trying to understand is, and what do we like about all the other groups too, as opposed to how are we different and what we might not like. And recognize that our own groups aren't perfect, and there's lots of imperfections in every person as well as every group. And this idea of welcoming diversity and inclusiveness, I think it's wonderful. And I think, when we look outside and we say, I wish none of that ever happened, I think the way we start changing things when you think that there's not much you can change is you start looking internally at your own biases, where they reside, without being judgmental about yourself. We all grow up with these things. The key is to recognize when they're impacting us, when they may be impacting a relationship with another human being, and what we can do about it. I think this whole idea of emotional control, of managing emotions, of emotional intelligence, is this concept that let's be smarter about how we go through life in terms of the emotions we experience. Let's even plan emotionally how we want to feel in certain circumstances. This is where I initially went with all of the work I was doing on emotional intelligence, was I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to make this useful, and the focus was work initially, if I'm going to make this useful at work, then I need to think about all the situations at work where emotions are really powerful and sometimes impact rational thinking in a negative way. And I started to think, well, what are those times? Well, one example is when people are going through a big change. If you're going through a big change at work and it's announced and you haven't heard much details, but you start thinking about your own personal situation, that's what most people start with. Other people might think more about others because they're more other-oriented. Again, no judgments here. I think it's both useful to think about yourself and others as you consider how change is going to impact you and people you care about. And then you think about, well, I have a reporting relationship to the person that has been my leader or my boss, my manager, whatever title you want to use, for a period of time now. And I really like this woman or this guy. And I'm feeling like I want to be part of their team. I hope that doesn't change. So there's the fear that you might end up reporting to somebody else. If you're in one of those high-level boxes on top of an organization structure where you're the leader of a lot of people, let's say, you worry perhaps that the next change that's announced might impact you and you may not be in that particular spot in the organization anymore. And you worry, will that have an impact on your salary, on what you're doing, and whether you can accomplish things that are important to you that you're in the middle of, whether it has a negative or positive impact on your career going forward. What is it going to mean for your family? Will it be more time at work and less time at home, given what the change might bring? So there's all kinds of questions. And I thought that's a great time to think about how emotional intelligence, being smarter about all the people's emotions, especially those that you really care, stay with the organization as leaders you want to work with and think about and plan for. And that's where I kind of targeted my career initially, was helping leaders of large organizations, also small and medium-sized organizations more recently, work through the ideas of change creates emotional impact, often adverse impact, if it's not really clear to the people how it's going to be beneficial. One, to the organization. People want to know that it's rational and it makes sense. It's going to benefit the organization. That's why it's worth doing. But even more importantly for many people is, how is it going to impact them? Are they going to be okay? So I began to think that's one place where if I teach people to think about emotions, how they're planning for the changes that they want that's going to make their organization better, how those changes are likely to impact all the key players at different levels throughout the organization, and how do we get in front of that so we minimize emotional resistance to what we're trying to do. So that was one way I thought about emotions. Another way I thought about emotions was, how about the performance review? I mean, coaching, any kind of coaching situation where you're giving positive and negative feedback is loaded with emotional stuff. But especially when something's going into a record, a year-end review that goes into a file that people look at sometimes to see whether or not they want you for their organization in terms of a promotion within your existing company or division. And if there's something negative in an evaluation that is being put into your performance file, that's pretty darn emotional. At least it is for me, and I think it is for almost everybody. So how do you deal with emotions around performance reviews? And again, I think you can be smarter than we've ever been, by emotionally planning how you want to have a conversation with someone who works for you about their year-end evaluation. I know a lot of people in the middle of that right now. So just a little bit of guidance on that. If you want to call about that, by the way, let me give you the number in case anybody's just really anxious to call. 203-336-9756. 203-336-9756. So the concept of performance review, the way I think about it, or really any conflict, where you're going to have a conversation that has conflict as part of it. And assuming you need to have the conversation, whether it's conflict or it's a year-end review, and there's some things you're still concerned about. The year-end review often has hey, here's where things worked really well. Here's where you met expectations. Here's where some expectations weren't met. Some were outside of your ability to control what happened. We still need to say that you didn't meet them, but that we need to also comment that this was not something that you impacted or were able to impact. These were circumstances outside of your control and mine. Or there were just some things you didn't do. I've got my first caller, so let me take that. Hello, this is Chuck. Could you turn your dial down, please?
Hi, I'm going to make this very short because I'm damaged. I was at a job. I was attacked. It was a non-typical job. I happened to get saved and rescued, put me in the ambulance, and since then I have no saliva at times, and I would like you to address how you cure something like that when you come across people who are mentally ill, who are in positions of power. And I'm going to hang up. Thank you.
Thank you. So unfortunately I couldn't get any details about how all this happened, but let me just say that someone in your circumstance experienced the trauma at work by someone. I didn't get whether it was somebody in leadership that did this, or I'm not sure who it was or how it happened, but nevertheless I do get that you experienced something that damaged you. And I think there's the way that sometimes this manifests itself depends in part on the person's psyche to start with. Most people would carry the trauma for a long time and really struggle with ever overcoming it and not being fearful again in lots of similar, not similar in the sense that you're threatened by other people, but just circumstances where you might be alone with someone, where the images of what happened to you just reoccur and reoccur and reoccur. It's sort of the idea of post-traumatic stress syndrome. I'm sure you know this because you've been going through it. There isn't a lot of success around these things. There's medications sometimes are helpful. Therapy is often a useful tool with someone that you really respect and like, who really understands and feels your pain and is able to help you rebound when the pain gets too great. You may not need to see a therapist every week or every month, but maybe on occasion, or at least initially when it happens, you may need to see them pretty regular during the course of several weeks until you feel like you're at a place where you're beginning to feel something where it feels internally safe somehow to you. So I don't have a great answer for this, because if I did, obviously multimillionaire and lots of people would be cured of these things. But a lot of people do suffer post-traumatic stress syndrome, whether in a circumstance as unfortunate as yours, or when they've gone off to war, or they happen to be in some kind of protective, they're guarding something or someone, and an incident happens, or in domestic abuse. So there's all kinds of places where things like this show up, unfortunately. The first thing is you want to make sure you find yourself in a place where you feel safe. Because if you're, years ago I studied Maslow's pyramid, and it starts with feeling safe. Being able to live and feel safe. And if you don't have that, all the other good things about belonging and self-actualizing, none of that can happen if you really are feeling threatened every moment you're awake, and when you're sleeping even. So how do you get past it? One is you do a lot of things that feel good to you, that give you confidence and competence in areas where maybe you are able to contribute to society as an individual on your own without other people. You begin to try to desensitize yourself to new relationships, and you try to work through the idea of having at least a few other people in your life until at some level you begin to feel trusting again. The key thing, I think, on something like this, and the way I think you deal with it, I don't want to say you cure it, because I don't think you cure it, but the way you manage it is to think about when something like this has happened and it reoccurs in your mind when you're you're getting on a subway, you're boarding a plane, you're going into a restaurant, and all of a sudden you have that terror of what that incident felt like to you, and somehow it just rears its ugly head in the middle of something where you're with other people somewhere. And or even if you're in your home and somebody knocks on the door. I mean, it could be anywhere. The key thing is that you're not going to change that feeling. I don't think you can ever get rid of that feeling. But when you can change, and what this show is about, is changing the narrative. Changing the narrative to something that you can say to yourself, that reminds yourself that what happened could possibly happen again, but it's extremely unlikely that it'll happen again. And you want to say to yourself, I recognize this feeling. I realize when this feeling comes on me, it's kind of like you talk to yourself. This is the way I see it. I say, I'm talking to myself and said, Chuck, I know this happened to me before. I don't think this is the same situation. I'm pretty confident that it's not the same situation, and I want to just be able to recognize when the feeling comes. It's designed somehow to be protected of me, but it's actually getting in the way of me living my life, and I want to move on from it. Recognize it's there. It's going to keep coming back. Acknowledge the feeling and let it pass. Now, you might think that's impossible, and I would say to you, when you first try to let it go, it does feel impossible. But if you continue to alter the narrative until you start to say things to yourself that you actually believe, that you actually feel are helpful to you, and maybe a therapist can help you with creating the narrative that works for you. You won't get it right the first time. You won't get it right the second time. You may not have it right by the 100th time. But it's going to get better. And maybe it's the 101st time the narrative actually works the way you want. And you begin to understand that a trauma happened to you. That event will never go away. But you are acknowledging the event, recognizing that it ruined a period of your life because it didn't allow you to live your life in a way where you felt comfortable anywhere anymore. But you're changing that because you want to go forward into life with the idea that my trust was broken, it was damaged in a horrible way, but I'm not going to live in fear the rest of my life. I'm going to be able to beat that and change that inside myself. The challenge isn't with anybody else. The challenge is with me. And that life events can be terrible, horrific. We've all seen and heard about lots of things that you can't even believe they happened in the world. But they do. And yet the world goes on. And if we make the choice and we want to go on and live a full life, a life that has joy in it, that we've got to somehow recognize when this feeling comes, it's going to keep coming and coming and coming. But the way we deal with it, the things we say to ourselves about it, we can change that until we get to a place where it's manageable. And that's the way I feel about this. I don't think you ever cure it in the sense that it goes away, but it's manageable. And we do find that there are other aspects to life that we can enjoy. I don't know if that's helpful. I hope it is. I think that's the way I would suggest that you deal with this. If you've got somebody that you're seeing regularly, some kind of therapist, perhaps you can share this idea with them and they can help you craft the narrative. So that's the way the show works anyway, folks. It's the idea of trying to think about emotionally, how do you change what you experience? Well, I mean, there are things, deep-rooted things. I mean, there's generational traumas that certain groups of people experience that they grow up with and they feel all the time. There's the incidental traumas that this woman who called me just spoke about that are horrific when they happen, and you don't know how you ever live past it. And for a while, you don't feel like you're living anymore. You're just hiding in fear. So that's pretty severe. You know, a lot of the calls I get aren't quite to that level, of course, but I don't think it matters in terms of level. I think the skill set and the ideas of trying to change things up are two ways we manage our emotions differently. One is we try to change the emotion. Can we change the emotion so we don't feel threatened anymore? I mean, there are things that some people will do. They'll take martial arts training. They'll arm themselves. There'll be a permit to carry. Again, I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying that's some things people do because they want to feel like if anybody ever attacks them again, there'll be a consequence that other person won't be allowed to continue to ever do something horrific like that to anyone else, because they'll react and they'll defend themselves. Um, and maybe that makes somebody feel safe. And again, you got to do what works for you. You got to find some way that works for you. But I do think that it's a key skill for all of us in any circumstances where things from our past are just been, horrible in the way we think about them, and they keep coming back up and impacting and ruining our lives in many ways, that we want to find some way to move past that. And the key skill, I believe, is to change the narrative. So, okay, well, that's one of those really unfortunate things that happen to people, and hopefully this has given you at least some ideas of something you might try to help make yourself feel better about life. The show is designed to be uplifting. The conversation and the topic was tough, obviously, but I hope that you found something useful in that conversation. Thanks. Hi, this is Chuck Wolfe. You're on the air.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Chuck. Yeah, hold on a second. I had to turn my radio down. This is Norman again.
Hi, Norman. How are you doing?
Okay. Listen, to regress back to what we talked about last week.
Right.
The storage space, asking this woman if I could use her space there.
Yeah, I remember you were kind of nervous about being rejected, about asking for a favor. Yeah, how did it turn out?
Well, it turned out really, really positive. I put all these expectations and thoughts in my head, which, was one of my minor downfalls. I don't know what the major one is, but I have to go find that out sooner or later. But it turned out well. When I asked her, regardless, I was thinking because she's an Asian woman from Japan, that I would have difficulty speaking and having her understand me. But it didn't turn out that way at all. So all my expectations were blown out of proportion. She was wonderful. She said, "Oh, go ahead and use it. Go ahead and use it. I don't need it." She was so wonderful about it. I was so surprised. So
isn't that nice? Were you able? I know we talked about you were going to possibly offer her like a lamp that you had or some artwork or something.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I did. I took the picture of that lamp, and I showed her the picture, and I said, "Well, listen, this is something I don't need. Would you like it?" And she said, "Oh no, I don't know." Her apartment, by the way, is so beautiful. She's got it so nicely decorated. So I saw it from. I didn't go into the apartment.
Uh-huh.
I talked to her at the door.
Uh-huh.
She didn't say come in or anything. So, but that was okay. And so I said to her, I said, "You have a beautiful apartment from what I can see."
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, thank you." She said, So she was very gracious.
Nice.
About the whole thing, and it really turned out to be positive. More positive than I could imagine.
Isn't that nice? So that's a good story, Norman. Thank you for that. I'm glad you recalled that.
Yeah, it just goes to show how you put these blocks and these things that into your head, the thoughts,
Right.
about something like as was saying just a minute ago about thinking positive about things. The worst, how bad could it get? I mean, if you let it get that bad, it will be.
Interesting. Did you move your stuff in there then? Have you actually moved stuff in?
Well, I have moved some of the things in there, yeah, just to not have it totally empty.
Yeah, so just for anybody else that's listening, when I recap, Norman, when you called last week, you have a small apartment where you are an artist and you've got a lot of artwork and you need some extra space, and then you knew this woman had in the building, in the basement, a storage area that she wasn't using, and you were nervous about asking about it. And I guess when we talked about it, we talked about how you want to feel and some things that you might do to make you feel more comfortable. And so you approached her, and it all turned out wonderful, it sounds like.
Yeah. The act of approaching her with this was was to me, it was difficult. Of rejection. That's what the whole thing came down to. And there's a lot of rejection in my life, which I still grapple with. But I keep telling myself you gotta cut that out. A lot of times, how you talk to yourself in a way.
All the time. Yeah, no, I absolutely. So it's funny. It's funny. Sometimes people worry about that. That they said that they have a voice in their head talking to them. And one time, one time I was in a group of people with a group of people, and somebody in the front of the room was saying, by the way, I know some people think you're crazy when you hear a voice in your head, but it's common. We all hear a voice in our head. And one of my friends who was sitting beside me raised his hand. He said, "Just one voice?"
Yeah. I mean, I do get this constant voice, and it comes from friends that I used to have that I don't see anymore, and the voice it comes from the woman. There was married couple, but it mainly comes from her. How she conducted her life. Everything was so neat. So she did things in a way that if you did something other than what she thought, she would sort of reprimand you in a way. Make comment like, "Why did you have to say this? Isn't this good enough for you?" That voice. Just cleaning my dishes up after I eat, this voice comes into my head, and I see her. It's weird. It's just a strange thing that.
Well, do you have any idea what that represents for you? I mean, I have some thoughts about it, but what are yours?
I don't know. Well, the feeling that she got from me is that she wasn't good enough. Like, she wasn't good enough, that I had to make it, always have my say in something that she did, or whatever.
And so, do you find yourself, when her voice echoes in your head and you hear her speaking to you, that is she being a critic of you when you hear her voice, or is she being? I mean, is it just a conversation, or is it something almost always critical?
Oh, it is critical, yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, one of the ways that I mean, this is just what it sounds like to me. And again, I'm not going to say I'm absolutely right about this, but I'm usually pretty accurate. You're usually pretty accurate in these things. We all have these self-critics. I mean, in our head, we have our own critic, and sometimes we give them a face or a person because it kind of fits how we felt when that person talked to us. So it's really not her, but you're kind of criticizing yourself, and the way you're framing it is her, because it kind of fits how you felt when you were with this woman, and so that's how it's showing. I mean, it's just sort of what it sounds like to me, anyway.
No.
It's like your own self-critic. You're criticizing yourself about something where you're kind of second guessing yourself. And whenever it pops up, it's often in the form of this woman, because that's how it felt when you were with her. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. Well, it might be even deeper than that. I don't know. It could be coming from my mom, who's not alive. But I don't see her, in my mind's eye.
Was your mom critical of you a lot? Is that how you see your mom?
She was in her way. She was, when I come to think about it. Being a middle boy, I think I might have spoken to you about this before in one of our conversations. I grew up down in Brooklyn, and I had an older and younger brother who are both deceased now. I'm the only guy left. And I remember my mom well, I was like the younger, before my younger brother came along, I was the mama's boy, so to speak. And I was close to my mother. And when he came along, he was gone. The attention was taken away and more on him. The attention was given to him more.
Yeah,
and I didn't understand this.
Sure, it's kind of standard middle child syndrome, I think. Yeah. So you lost the advocacy of your mom, and when she did deal with you, she was more critical. If you really want to take this deep, and you might be right, you might be that you do see this woman sort of as representative of your mom, but you don't want to be critical of your mom, so you put it in this woman's caricature that you have in your head.
That's right. They're like shifting.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know how critical that is, but it's just an interesting kind of thing. In any case, I think the thing is that when you hear the criticism, what do you do with it? That's sort of it's sort of whatever form it's taking. How do you respond to it? What goes on when you hear it? I think for all of us, I'm some stuff that just happened yesterday. Something myself where I'm really judging myself poorly today because I was irresponsible about a couple things last night after being very responsible all day long and working really hard to fix something that was broke and getting it fixed, but just being exhausted mentally afterwards. And then just did a couple of irresponsible things that were selfish. And I'm judging myself around that. So, we all have those critical things. But the key thing is, I guess, when you have them is, what do you do going forward? If it really is something you shouldn't have done and you shouldn't have done it and it's happened before, next time it shows up and you want to go there, what are you going to say to yourself so it's different? That's the key. This is where the narrative stuff really helps, I think. For me, for everybody, it's just like you find yourself doing something that you've done before and it doesn't feel right to somebody else, or it doesn't really, it's not really what you want to be about or how you want to be thought about, and yet here you are doing it.
See, here's the thing, too, is that when it happens in real life, like, for instance, the other day, I was at a library, and I was having problems with the computer, and the technician was helping me, but then he was getting interrupted by other people who had a problem, and he sort of took the attention off of me, giving it to them, and here I am standing around waiting for this fella to, solve my little problem or whatever.
Yeah.
And then what happened was there's this woman. This is really interesting. There was this woman who I know from the past who I hadn't seen. She was there at the library, and she had a problem. And she had him looking into her problem, again, taking away his attention from me,
right.
Okay, for my problem. So it finally ended up where I went over to the desk. She was standing there, like, waiting in line. So when I went over to the desk to speak with this guy, I needed your help. Come on, I've been waiting around. You've been taking care of everybody else. And this woman abruptly said, "Oh, I'm here first. I'm waiting here. I'm before you." And I turned around. I said, "Well, I've been here, before you, asking him to help me out with something," and she did not understand it, and I got annoyed, and I told her, "Shut up," just like that, and she looked at me, and afterwards, I didn't think that was a good thing to say.
Yeah,
and I thought about it, how I could have handled it differently,
yeah.
But at the moment, that's what happened.
Yeah.
So the attention was again taken away. I mean, it's almost like my brother coming into the picture, and my mother's attention was taken away from me.
Yeah, that didn't turn out so good. First of all, it's frustrating for everybody to have to talk about what you're talking about. And she felt like she was right because she didn't know about the earlier, conversation you had with this fella. she just saw herself in line and you cutting. That's how it appeared to her. And then
Yeah.
you telling her to shut up was your way of saying, I'm just so frustrated and you don't get it and I was here first and just shut up. And
Mm.
that's kind of awful, honestly, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just because of your own, frustration and impatience. And I mean, if you look at what you could have done different, there's not much that's going to change how she feels, except to just simply, to state without being annoyed or without emotion in your voice, just calmly stating, "Look, I saw you get in line. I know you think you were here before me, but what you don't understand is before this person started to talk to the fellow he's talking to now, he was talking to
Yeah.
me and then went over here. So really, you weren't here before me, and I'm sorry
Right.
about that, but that's what happened."
Yeah.
And I mean, she may not have bought it anyway, but I mean, that's where you want to go with something like that. But you got to control
Right.
yourself because you're in the middle of just feeling. And again, it got caught up maybe with the same stuff you said. These are the interesting things, Norman. It's kind of interesting to talk with you because it triggers stuff from the past. So the
Yeah.
fact that your mom's paid more attention to your brother, and that's what this sort of reminded of you of, caused you to want to snap because I guess this wasn't your mom and it wasn't your brother, but it felt the same. And it
Yeah.
just caused you to, I hate when this happens, and instead of dealing with it somewhat rationally,
Yeah.
trying to understand emotionally what's going on. But that's
Well,
that's what the show's about. I mean, it's really about trying to help you see how you might have behaved differently or how you might behave differently in the future should you find yourself in a place like this again.
yeah. Well, the one thing I would have done too, if I was at the library yesterday and the woman wasn't there, and I was hoping she would be there because I did want to apologize,
Yeah,
for my
yeah,
actions.
yeah,
It's just to make me feel good, and hopefully to make her feel better,
yeah.
and make make amends. That's simple. I don't like to hold on to negative uh, things.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. Anyway, well, thanks a lot
Well,
for
it's
your
real nice to talk to you, Norman, and thanks for calling back about that. I'm glad it worked out. Maybe at some point you become friendly with this woman because you're going to have to interact with her a few different times at least. So at the
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Well, already I've gotten a reaction from another resident of the building where I live, who said that they ran across her at a meeting or something going on downstairs, and she mentioned, or no, it was his thought that, oh Norman, what did you say to her? She said, this woman hardly ever comes out, and he, because he knew I had talked to her about the space,
yeah,
and he said she's like coming out now. She's not being so reclusive, staying
isn't
in
that
her
nice?
apartment.
Yeah,
So
isn't
I
that
said,
nice?
well, I don't know if it has anything to do with me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you don't know. I mean, again, it's often nice. Maybe,
Uh,
I don't know what if she drinks tea or coffee, or maybe you bring her a coffee or tea. Next time you have to go ask her for some, to open the gates up for you, something like that. Yeah.
uh,
I don't want to make it more than it is, but
no,
it's nice to have a relationship with people in your building that you sort of get to know a little bit. So, if you need something or they need something, they feel like they can call on you and you can call on them. So.
right, right, okay.
All right, Norman.
Well,
Thanks a lot for the call. Appreciate it.
yeah, thanks for your help.
You
I'll
bet.
talk to you. Bye bye.
Bye bye now. Okay, folks. Again, the show's the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. This is Chuck Wolfe, and I try to help people deal with emotionally challenging situations. It's really nice to hear when some conversations that I've had with people that sound like they're going to be helpful actually are helpful. And Norman, thanks a lot for calling back. And the woman who called earlier, again, I don't, you didn't leave your name, and that's fine. But I do hope that something resonated with you about talking with the kind of trauma that you experienced, and that you find it somewhat helpful. So again, the things I was talking about when I first opened the show was this idea that emotions show up all over the place in life, as we were just talking with Norman, as we talked with the woman earlier. Everybody's feeling emotions. One of the things I liked when I'm first introducing the idea of emotional intelligence is that a lot of times we only think of ourselves as being emotional that we have to worry about being intelligent about emotions is when we have a very strong emotion of some kind. Either a fear reaction or an angry reaction or even a joyous reaction, but we're not in a place where we can, just scream and shout because we're so happy about something. We might be in a place where, in a library where you need to be quiet or something, but you hear something, some great news or something comes across on your text or something on a smartphone. But anyway, the idea of emotions to me is that it's much more deep than just the simple experience of an intense emotion, because emotions to me are like breathing. And what I mean by that is, if I ask you, are you breathing? Of course you're breathing, but now because I've asked you, are you breathing, you're thinking more about the fact that I'm taking a breath. I'm actually breathing. I'm focused on my breathing just for a little while because I've called your attention to it. But normally we just breathe. Now, when do we think about our breathing? When we're swimming underwater, perhaps, when we're running up a flight of steps, or chasing after something to catch a cab or a train or something, and we're late. So we think of emotions when the stakes are really high and it's very intense, but most of the time we're just feeling things. And one of the things I've discovered through the science now of emotional intelligence is that emotions that we're feeling, even when they're subtle, drive the thoughts that we have. Think about that for a minute. The emotions that we're feeling drive the thoughts that we have. Whatever we're thinking about, whatever's going on in our head and our self-talk, starts with what are we feeling. It doesn't always directly relate to what you're thinking about, that you can tie it specifically to an emotion, but a lot of times you can. It's kind of like peeling back an onion, sort of that metaphor, that you peel back your behavior. What's behind this child's behavior or this adult's behavior? What's behind it? Why are we seeing this behavior? Well, you peel that back this layer and you see the thoughts that this person is having. You peel back the thoughts and you see the feelings that people are having. If you've been listening for a little while, you can obviously see that in the first caller I had, she's having a horrible time, just being around other people at all, because this trauma that she experienced was so devastating to her. And so that feeling, that overwhelming feeling of trauma, now that's an intense feeling, drives the thoughts that she has and impacts her behaviors very directly, I think. At least that's my interpretation just on a minute or two talking to her. Of course, I could be wrong on that because we didn't talk very long. But again, that's sort of what happens with trauma. The other is Norman's reaction in the library. Again, if you heard him, Norman, when you were talking about the person who was the woman who thought she actually was in line to get help from the person in the library who was helping with computers, but in fact she wasn't, because this person had gone away from you and went and talked to somebody else, and then that woman got online and sort of took the next spot, and you were supposed to, he was supposed to come back to you. But you tied that all the way back to what it felt like when you were the youngest child in your family, how much attention you got from your mom, and then when your younger brother showed up, it all changed. And all of that got caught up in your saying, shut up to the woman. And so again, the feelings drove the thoughts, drove the behavior. Now, that's the connection most people don't make very often. So if you see behaviors that you personally want to change in yourself, it's really useful, I believe, to think about, what am I saying to myself every time I do something that looks like that behavior? When it shows up, what have I done? What have I thought about right before I did it? And what was I possibly feeling? Sometimes it helps to keep a journal. When you do if it's happening a lot, certain behaviors happen a lot. Cigarette smoking. If you haven't broken the habit yet, and it's not easy to break. I was a cigarette smoker a long time ago, but it took me a real long time to break the habit. It wasn't easy. Some people find it easy. It wasn't easy for me, and lots of other people find it really hard. So if you happen to still be smoking, what are you saying to yourself every time before you light up? And what's the feeling you're having beforehand? I mean, I can almost tell you that there's something to do with anxiety typically, some level of anxiety. And the thought process, if I remember it right, was a cigarette makes me relax So if I light up a cigarette, even though I know it's bad for me and part of me is fighting with myself about it, it's still, I got that relaxed feeling that comes from a cigarette. So how do you change up? It makes me relax at the same time it's killing me. How do you change the narrative to that? So that when you think about it being relaxing, it just increases your anxiety instead. So the idea of changing narratives is such a critical aspect to this idea of an emotion roadmap. When people talk about emotional intelligence, there's a lot of different definitions out there. Essentially, one way of thinking about it is, how do I use emotions in my relationships, in myself, to identify what I'm feeling and what others are feeling. To use emotions for myself and for others, and to understand emotions of myself and others, and to manage emotions for myself and others in the best ways possible. How do I identify, use, understand, and manage emotions for myself and others in the best way possible? That's what I see as emotional intelligence. Pretty straightforward. It's tied to the actual emotional abilities. This is a deeper story and it goes into the actual science, but it's tied to what the scientists, Peter Salovey, president of Yale, Jack Mayer, University of New Hampshire psychologist, people that I got to work with in the late 1990s, early 2000s, what they were discovering about emotional intelligence was that we all have the ability to identify emotions in ourselves and others. But we're not the same in that ability. That's the idea of an intelligence, is that we're not all the same. On average, people are somewhat good at identifying, but there are people that are really poor, terribly poor, don't get it right hardly ever in terms of knowing what they're feeling themselves or what others are feeling. And boy, does that complicate life for people when they don't get it right, especially if they think they get it right. I mean, that's all the work I've been doing over the years has really taught me that. The other is this use of emotion, which is that whatever specific feelings that we're feeling at a particular point in time are influencing our thoughts and behaviors. And that's what I was just talking about. That's the heart of what I've discovered, is if we understand how our feelings influence our thoughts and behaviors, and we're not happy with our thoughts and behaviors, we want something different, a different outcome somehow, then we've got to look at, is there a different feeling, a more ideal feeling that we can switch to? If I remember times when I was jealous of the way my parents treated my brother versus how they treated me, and if that's a theme that shows up for me and it's somewhat regular, and I've reacted poorly whenever it shows up, whenever that happens, can I change what I feel when I think about that? Instead of saying, hey, you know what? That feeling is familiar because I was a kid and I didn't handle it well. But you know what? I'm an adult. It was a long time ago. And if I'm honest, there were times when mom treated and dad treated me better than they treated my brother. It's all just part of what happened before. There's no change in it. It probably wasn't as, when I say that I wish it had been about me, that probably wasn't fair either. And time to let go. Time to move on, time to no longer blame my parents for whatever they might have done and accept the fact I'm a responsible adult and I want to make my way going forward without having baggage hold me down. Old things reoccurring in my mind that make me think that they're things from the past and that they're upsetting to me at a level they shouldn't be because they're tied to something that doesn't matter anymore. How do I learn to let go? That's all part of the use of emotion in my mind. Understanding how emotions work is, if I want to change from what I am feeling to what I'd like to feel differently, how do I do that? What are my strategies? What are my plans for moving from anxious to confident, from betrayed to trusting, from fearful to calm? How do I make those kinds of things happen? By the way, it's not always from what you might consider a negative or unpleasant feeling to a positive feeling. Sometimes you might say, I'm going into this situation and I feel pretty calm about it, but there are risks out there. I need to be more wary than I'm being. I know that about myself right now. I just want it all to be comfortable and it really isn't. So I might want to change from calm to wary or attentive or even fearful. Can you see where that might be the more appropriate feeling in a particular situation? So it's really being thoughtful about planning emotionally how you want to feel. That's what the show's been about. I hope you enjoyed the show today. Again, I'm on the first and second Wednesdays of the month. My name is Chuck Wolfe. The show is called The Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. That's the tagline. It's all about taking the wheel and controlling how you feel. You can do so much more to control how you feel, is what I've discovered and what the show's all about. I hope you've been learning about that as we've talked. So I'm on the first and second Wednesdays of each month from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you want your friends to listen who aren't in the listening area, they can listen on WPKN.org. If you want to hear some of my previous shows, especially the shows I like, you can listen to the Public Radio Exchange, Exchange PR, just put Public Radio Exchange and try to find it. And then if you want to listen to me on SoundCloud, I've also put a bunch of shows up on SoundCloud and iTunes and Stitcher. So if you enjoy the show, tell your friends about it. If you think you benefited from the show and you'd like to share that with me, you can email me. I love hearing from you on email. CJWOLFE@CJWOLFE.com. That's how you can write to me and drop me a note. Again, I want to thank my two callers. I hope that the woman who suffered the trauma is feeling better. And Norman, thanks again for calling in and sharing your good news. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.